Hi everybody, this is Liam Martin from Running Road, and in this video, we're going to be talking about what is actually a remote work plan and how do you implement it inside of your business. Stay tuned. So I've been talking to a lot of people, and particularly what I lovingly like to call the pandemic panickers, and they've been having an issue because all of these guys went remote about a year and a half ago and they have no effing clue what the heck is going on and how to actually implement a proper remote work plan. So if you've already kind of understood this is probably going to be a pretty good refresher, but maybe you could skip this video. If this is brand new to you, this is the stuff that really is going to differentiate you from everyone else, particularly as remote work starts to be adopted across the world and stops being an employee perk and starts to become table stakes. So a remote work plan refers to guidelines and HR policies, i.e. human resources, that help organizations streamline communication and workflow while working remotely. Basically, it's a system that allows you to help and establish clear objectives and goals, allow employees the flexibility required to meet their goals, and setting up a comprehensive communication plan for easy collaboration. Also, before we kind of get into how to actually implement this, there's one really important thing that you absolutely must know about a remote work plan before we get into the details. Subscribing to this YouTube channel is absolutely critical to, number one, implementing a remote work plan successfully, and number two, making sure that Igor doesn't hurt me. He hurts me every single time that I don't mention that I should subscribe everyone to this YouTube channel. 89% of you are still not subscribed. That is horrible. Please subscribe. So first up, if you haven't actually set up a remote work policy, you should do it today, right now. I'm gonna tell you exactly what you need to do. This is what we're gonna call kind of like your alpha or your beta version of a remote work policy agreement. Basically, on a piece of paper, or well, we don't usually use pieces of paper, on a Google Doc, break down what are the requirements for the remote worker, what are the requirements for the employer, i.e. what kind of perks are you gonna provide to the remote worker? Are you gonna provide the equipment at their home? Are you gonna provide them with a chair? Are you gonna require them, give them a stipend for internet? And then also on the employee side, what are they required to do? Are they going to have to be in one particular location? Can they travel to multiple locations? Where are they going to be a tax resident? All of this stuff you need to break down outside of your general work agreement that you might have in place. So this is a really great opportunity to just put together what are those general outlines that you want to kind of talk about. And then as we go through all of these, you might be able to want to add some more into the mix. So the second thing that you need to do is you need to be able to really analyze whether you're going to allow a flexible remote work schedule. So a lot of employees that work remotely, they don't necessarily have set hours unless they're someone that works like in a call center or a customer support rep or something like that. Then you actually have to have a very required shift. But outside of that, fundamentally, the 9 to 5 is pretty stupid. Little known fact, it was invented during the Industrial Revolution because in a factory where they didn't have electronic lights or electrical lighting, you could only work from 9 to 5, which is when the sun was out and you could naturally light the factory floor. So it's a pretty stupid concept and a lot of people still do it. Remote workers don't really exist inside of that 9 to 5. Maybe they want to work from 10 p.m. till 3 o'clock in the morning. That's fine, as long as they actually get their work done and they put in the time. So are you going to enable a flexible remote work schedule? And then what are the terms of that? Do they have to actually show up for particular meetings? Do they not have to show up to meetings? Are they going to work synchronously, asynchronously? You need to break all that down inside of that line item. Next up is you have to set up effective communication policies. So what does that mean? Well, inside of remote work, there are really two major categories. There's synchronous communication and asynchronous communication. And the two of those need to work effectively in order for you to be able to have an efficient team. Synchronous would be a Zoom call as an example, a phone call, anything in which you're actually live communicating with the person, an email, instant messaging, as long as you're actually not required to immediately respond back to that instant message. Generally inside of remote teams, we try to maximize asynchronous communication and we try to minimize synchronous communication because it's very expensive in comparison to asynchronous communication, and synchronous communication stresses people out. People don't want those little beeps and bops everywhere inside of their workday, particularly if it's like 11 o'clock at night and you're required to be able to jump on to be able to have a meeting, as an example, with an employer. So it's really important to be able to set up that communication plan. How are you going to communicate? Through what mediums are you going to communicate? Are there certain hours in which you don't communicate? We, as an example, do not talk to people on weekends unless it's actually part of their shift that they're required to be on. You need to be able to deploy those all inside of that line item inside of your remote work policy. Next up is you need to set up clear KPIs for employee engagement. So what does that mean exactly? How often are you actually going to meet with your employees? Is it daily? Is it weekly? Are you gonna have a one-on-one? Are you gonna have a group meeting? Are you gonna have both? How long are they gonna last? What are you gonna talk about? What are the outcomes of that meeting? Very clearly outline all of that information so that the actual employee knows, hey, you know what? I'm supposed to meet with my manager once a week, and I'm supposed to meet for a 60-minute meeting, and then I have a team meeting that lasts for 90 minutes, and then outside of that, I'm not required to do any other meetings with either my coworkers or with my manager. That's how we have it set up inside of our company. Again, just because that's the way that we set it up doesn't mean that there aren't meetings outside of that realm, but fundamentally, that's what we set up with each of our employees, and I would clearly break down all of those requirements so that all of your employees know exactly how you're supposed to engage with other employees. Also, outside of that, interacting with other employees is super important, meaning, can you just send someone a Slack message at 3 o'clock in the morning? Do you have to actually check their schedule before messaging them to see if they're available for a call? These are things that we do inside of the company. You need to be able to break that down as well if you want to have a really clear remote work policy in place. Number 5, as a subcategory of that, you're going to conduct regular but fast synchronous meetings. So, as I said before, there's 2 categories of communication inside of remote teams: synchronous and asynchronous. You want to minimize as much synchronous communication as humanly possible. It really stresses people out. People don't want to be on Zoom calls all day long. Zoom fatigue is real. You need to minimize that. So, make sure that you have a very efficient meeting system in place. Personally, for us, what we do is we have a no synchronous presentation rule, which means all presentations need to be made asynchronously on video. Then afterwards, everyone can actually watch that video, comment on the video asynchronously, and then you come together to be able to discuss any other tertiary issues or something that maybe you're not understanding inside of that presentation. Why do we do that? It's so that people are not on 2-hour Zoom calls 3 times in a row every single day, and they just want to kill themselves at the end of the day. And it also allows for people to consume that information and think about it a lot more deeply than they would have otherwise had they actually been on a synchronous call and didn't really necessarily have all of their ducks in a row to be able to comment on something in a meaningful way. So make sure you're doing that and putting it into your remote work policy. Next up, you need to measure productivity. So that might be different for you as it is for us inside of our company. We have a tool called Time Doctor, which I am also the co-founder of, and it measures not only just the amount of time that you spend on a particular task, but how efficiently you spend your time on that task. Kind of like Fitbit for work, but a lot better than that actually, in my opinion. And we use this tool to be able to figure out not necessarily how long you should work, but actually how efficiently you can work, meaning how could we cut 5 hours out of your workday doing boring meetings and instead having you focus on deep work throughout your workday. Now, if you don't want to use a tool like that, you need to have some type of clear KPI in place. We also use something called quantitative rocks or KPIs, where you have every employee responsible for some type of quantitative measure that they can personally move. So is that more backlinks to the website? Is that more phone calls being made? Is that more sales made inside of the business? Figure out what it is, have them report on that number every single week, and then you at least have a very clear measure of success and failure. Also, one of the other important points that you want to add into this remote work policy is make sure you define what success means. Is it $1,000 in sales per month, or is it $100,000 in sales per month? You need to be very clear about when you hit those targets and what those targets are going to be so that everyone is exactly on the same page and there's no surprises saying, I thought I was doing a great job when you let someone go. Next up is maintaining remote company culture. And this goes back to a couple other points that I talked about. Making sure that you're not messaging someone at 3 o'clock in the morning. Super important to make sure that you have a good company culture. How do you communicate with people? What's the cadence that you communicate with people? I have something called my hierarchy of communication, which is in person is better than video, video is better than audio, audio is better than instant messaging, and instant messaging is better than email. As you move up the chain, you become more synchronous. As you move down the chain, you become more asynchronous. You need to be able to figure out what the right mix of communication is for you, but I'll give you a perfect example. If I'm messaging someone more than, let's say, 10 times on Slack and we're still not figuring it out, I want to jump directly to a Zoom call so I know exactly the context of what's going on and we can get that solved much faster. So figure out all that breakdown inside of your company, figure out your own personal company culture. I write also a little operating manual. To me, it's Liam's instructions to his weird little quirks, and I give that to every direct report that reports to me. I also encourage them to write a document like that for me. So I know how they work and they know how I work, and we can really make sure that we just understand our differences between the two of us. Those are really important. We also do other kind of weird stuff inside of our company, which probably is very different from yours, but whatever it is, you need to define it and you need to make sure that there's no surprises for that remote worker when they come in for the very first time. Or if you are writing these again for your kind of emergency remote work turning into permanent remote work, this is a great time for a refresher to just break down all of those rules inside of your company. Last up, you need to make sure that you have solid data security. This is one that a lot of people don't really pay attention to. You need to have a VPN deployed. You need to be able to make sure that you change your passwords on a regular basis. You need to make sure that the internet connections inside of all of your employees' work from home setups are secure so that you don't have any incursions, you don't have any competitors coming in and trying to steal your data. You need all of those things in place, and you need to make sure that people conduct themselves with the same rules so that you have a certain level of data security. Because I gotta tell you, I have lots of friends of mine that didn't pay attention to that piece of advice, and now it's cost them millions of dollars in data incursions because customer list ends up going to a competitor, someone ends up stealing some data and we get hacked, a password disappears, and all of a sudden someone is held ransom for 100 Bitcoins if they don't pay up. This stuff happens a lot, and it is more important inside of a remote work environment than it is in an on-premise environment because you have better, clearer versions of security inside of a single kind of like environment, a single office environment. So remotely, it's a lot more difficult, and you need to be able to very clearly define all of those variables. So was that helpful to you? If it was, please let me know down in the comments below. And if you've put together a remote work policy, I'd love to be able to hear if there's anything that you would add that I did not add inside of this video. Just pop it down below. And also, while you're down there, why don't you like this video and again, subscribe to this YouTube channel. That way Igor won't hurt me and I will be able to live another day. See you in the next video.